conference like this that I have attended, and my interest has been, over the years, I've developed a lot of what you would call skepticism about what I read about IPCC. So this is an opportunity to firsthand see that. I've only been here today, and so far it's confirmed my suspicions that there's a lot of emotion and politics that goes into it. I have yet to see anybody present any scientific data.
I suppose, I guess it is generally a political conference here, but in terms of the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I don't have the figures to hand, but it seems like there are hundreds of scientists from around the world involved in that process. What is it in particular about that you would question?
Well, you say there are hundreds of scientists involved in it. They never seem to realize that probably a document that I signed at least 10 years ago, there's probably 35,000 scientists that have signed contrary to that issue. And when you look at the IPCC, 2,250 people, I think, signed that first report. Very few of them were scientists, incidentally. And a lot of them today would not even agree with that. So I find myself here to just confirm kind of my suspicions about what goes on at the IPCC, because every time I've had a discussion on the subject of the environment, those people who are the alarmists never present any kind of data. They only are criticism of people like me who are skeptics. I define people like me as realists because I'm not a climate scientist, I'm a physicist, and I've been working in technology all my life. And I would love to see data that supports any kind of claims. It would open my mind a lot. But so far I haven't seen anything that supports the claims that are being made by the IPCC.
Interesting. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not a scientist too, so but when you read the recent report, I mean, it seems that carbon dioxide levels are rising and the Earth's temperature is rising, albeit in a sort of an undulating way. Is there a particular part of the process that makes you sceptical? What is it in particular that makes you question it? Because there is an absolute wealth of knowledge out there from scientists all around the world, from recording stations, particularly NASA, which does some very interesting work on different temperatures. They've got a very interesting internet graphic which shows the temperatures warming from 1850 to now. What is it in particular that you would question? Is there something that you would pick up on?
Well, first off, the temperature recently, of course, has not been rising. But if you go back and look since the industrial age, the temperature has been slowly rising since the industrial age. Or go back to the small ice age back there. It's been rising since then, but never, almost never in the history of temperature. We can go back and look. It's been changing for 4.8 billion years. If you go back and look at the last 800,000 years, you find that the last time that the carbon dioxide level was even in this range, this low, was like 300,000 years ago. Go back a little farther than that, you find it was 15 times higher than it is now. And if you just want to look at data, you look at the last 2,000 years, and you find many, 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 many hundreds and thousands of times the temperature is higher than it is. So nothing unusual is really going on with carbon dioxide. Are humans contributing partly to that? Yes, but it's such a tiny piece of the atmosphere that it's any scientist would generally consider it irrelevant. And they're ignoring the theory that's gone on and been developed over centuries about what really is controlling the temperature. So I find it's a political argument. In fact, while I'm here, I'm going to make a presentation. I'm talking about the war on global warming. It's a war that I see is being fought on at least 4 fronts. One's the scientific front, which we've asked about. Then there's the media front, there's the public acknowledgement front, and then there's the political front. And if you look at following the science really, you'll find that in recent times, realists like myself seem to be winning. Realistic science seems to be winning on the science front. But when you get down to the media front, I don't think that the realists are dealing with it worth a darn.
Yeah, it's interesting. I haven't looked into this hard enough to know whether what you're saying is correct or not. But I mean, it doesn't strike me, looking at sort of the media as it stands, that realists are necessarily winning. I think there's evidently a healthy debate out there. But when you look at all the major scientific institutions, unless they've all been kidnapped and something's been injected into their brains, they all seem fairly convinced that climate change is being caused by humans. I mean, when you looked at the reports from the Mauna Loa Observatory earlier this year, and it said that carbon dioxide levels had passed the 400 parts per million, did that not strike you as worthy of note, of interest, given previous records?
Well, heck no. 400 parts per million? There's times when it's been 15 times higher than that just in the last, 800 million years. And it's relatively low as far as the historical level of carbon dioxide. Do you know what for example, in a submarine, they check the carbon dioxide levels because you got people living on there. Do you know what the alarm is, how much they're allowed? Up to 8,000 parts per million.
I'm glad I don't live on a submarine, though.
Up to 8,000 parts per million.
Would you like to live on a submarine? I'm not sure it'd be a particularly nice environment. But when you look at some of the situations that are happening around the world, the reported increases in extreme weather events, we can't directly attribute any of them at the moment. Do you not think it is worthy of note to think about why they're happening, and perhaps think about why sea levels are rising? I mean,
how much are they rising? Go ahead.
Well, Walter, I don't know. Read the latest IPCC report, but it strikes me from picking up a copy of that, they're rising substantially enough to affect some Pacific Island states. And if you lived in one of those states, you wouldn't be too pleased, would you?
I've always lived along the coast, except right now in Texas. Yeah. But if you go back and take a look at those IPCC reports, you find that the values that they're endorsing are coming down all the way along since the first IPCC report. And secondly, when you start looking at what's going on, you talked about climate events. Go back and look at the real numbers of those, and you find that they've been relatively low in the last 10, 15, 20 years in this century. So what I'm getting at is, it's plain to me that you're a true believer in what's going on, and unfortunately, you probably don't feel qualified to go challenge it. But if you go look at the data yourself, you will come up with a different conclusion. That's what I'm here to do, is present data that shows that.
Sure. Well, we'll have to take your word for it. In terms of your history as an astronaut, when you were, I think you told me you were in one of the first Apollo missions. When you were when you were in that capsule flying above the Earth's atmosphere, what were your thoughts about the planet and how sort of delicate it looked, and how important it is that we humans preserve it?
Well, I've always felt it's important that we preserve it. I was an organizer of an environmental concern organization in 1970, before you were born. So what I'm getting at is we're interested in the environment as well, but there's very few astronauts, former astronauts, that I would say would be an endorsement of what's going on now with the IPCC. And it's because we're realists, we're physical scientists, and we look at the data. We don't believe just the politics of it. And that's the case that I'm going to present here. And I'm sure I'm going to be surrounded by people who are skeptical of me. I'll call them skeptics.